Another weekend, another upset. And if this photo doesn't perfectly encompass everything that this past weekend and honestly this season has been so far, then I don't know what does. Not only did Spencer Lee nearly lose, no, he wasn't upset, but Iowa almost lost as well. We'll be talking about that, the Iowa State versus Arizona State dual meet that nearly went down to the wire, and a few upsets that majorly affected the rankings in this week's wrestling headlines. Let's stop stalling and start talking about that first wrestling headlines, which is that there were two major upsets as far as teams and individuals were concerned. Yeah, there were a couple others that really affected the field. Now, the first team that we had to talk about is Cornell, who had an impressive weekend. A top 15 ranked, and maybe you thought they were a little bit low in the rankings, and this weekend proved it. They ended up beating not only Arizona State, a top 3 ranked Arizona State, but also Virginia Tech, a top 10 ranked team. Now, in this Arizona State dual meet, there's not a ton of craziness to talk about. It was mostly a ton of decisions. Some good wins here was from Vito Arujau at 133 over Mikhail McGee, a top 5 ranked guy in the country, and Yanni D got a decision over Kyle Parko, who wrestled tough. We'll be hearing a little bit more about both of those guys because they had quite the weekend. Now, the other thing that happened here is that Cornell beat Virginia Tech. And this is where things got super, super juicy. Why? Well, because of what happened at 133 with Sam Latona beating Vito Arujau. I'll give you some of my thoughts on Sam Latona in the My Take section, but holy cow, Sam Latona was relentless in this dual meet. He scored a late takedown at the end of the first period, and with a couple of escapes, the final score ended up 3-2 with Sam Latona winning. This is the first time he's beat Vito Arujau in his career. The last time they wrestled, Arujau beat him 12-2. This is coming from the Fanco Wrestling newsletter at the Collegiate Wrestling Duels in 2021, and then at the 2022 Cliff Keen, he beat him 6-1, and finally, Latona was able to turn that match around and pick a big win up over Sam Latona, over Vito Arujau. And the other thing that happened, major upset that you had to have heard of, happened at the Backyard Brawl. The dual meet was back between West Virginia and Pitt, and fans were super psyched. But they weren't just psyched because the dual meet was back. They were psyched because of the results, at least if you're a West Virginia Mountaineer, because Pitt ended up losing that dual meet by a pretty significant margin, 24-11. Not what I thought was going to happen. Maryland was the other team to beat Pitt this season, who was also unranked. And we're showing Pitt has a full squad, right? They have Mickey Philippi, they have Nina Bonacorsi, they have the Hellers Wrestling, but they've just been struggling a bit this year, mostly based on matchups. West Virginia came in swinging, but most importantly, the guy who came in swinging was Jordan Titus at 141, who defeated the number 1 ranked guy in the country, Cole Matthews. Yes, it says number 2 right there. He's the number 1 ranked guy in the country. And you may be wondering, yes, Cole Matthews does have a loss to Andrew Alvarez from earlier in the year, but because it was at the All-Star Classic, those matches don't count against your ranking and against your record. Jordan Titus, an unranked wrestler from West Virginia. And you may be wondering, like, who the heck is Jordan Titus? Well, he's a multiple-time New York State champion, and he is a redshirt freshman out of the state of New York at 141 pounds. And yeah, he just took the world by storm by defeating Cole Matthews. And he scored a late takedown essentially to beat Matthews. And I guess he's going to be a guy to watch out for the rest of the season, as well as the rest of the craziness that's happening at 141. Now, Titus, yes, he was a top 10 ranked wrestler coming out of high school, or at times by Flow Wrestling at his weight class. So he's not like just out of the blue nowhere, but he honestly kind of is. And some of the other guys I want to mention here at the weight with Andrew Alvarez, Bo Bartlett is a top guy, Real Woods. These guys are all undefeated. And now we just have a pretty open field where I honestly think any one of these guys can win. It's not necessarily as crazy as 149, but it's still pretty crazy. The other cool thing that happened during this dual meet was Coach Flynn earned his 250th career victory. And what better way to do it for West Virginia than over Pitt? And my take on this whole situation is that the season continues to be crazy. As far as Latona, yeah, he had kind of a disappointing season last year at 125, but up a weight at 133, he seems to be doing way better, especially with his win over Vidal. And as I said, got to be watching out for Titus. As that moves us on to our second wrestling headline, which is Iowa State and Arizona State nearly going the distance. Yeah, this was a wild weekend for Arizona State as well. Now, I said nearly goes the distance because it almost went down to that last match. And here's what I'll tell you about, because Arizona State lost 19-15 to Iowa State. And Iowa State is this team that's just been growing and growing and doing better and better over the years, but really this season especially. These were some of the matchups here, and it's funny because it started out 5 matches in favor of Iowa State, then 5 in favor of Arizona State. They started off strong with a David Carr tech fall over Tony Negron, who previously wrestled at Penn State. Marcus Coleman earned a good win over Anthony Montalvo. Young Bastida kept turning it up. Ultimately, Colton Schultz was able to turn things around for Arizona State, which is where things got really interesting. But Carr started this duel out very strong. Now, what ended up happening, too, is this duel continued on, and Jesse Vasquez, number 25 ranked in the country, ended up upsetting Casey Swiderski. Another upset at 141 pounds. Are we even surprised? As I already mentioned, some of the other things that happened at this weight class. And that brought us really down to the last weight at 149, and everybody expected it was going to be crazy because guess what? It's 149. Kyle Parco versus Pinheiro Johnson. We know Pinheiro of Iowa State has been crushing it this season, but Kyle Parco's had a pretty solid season himself. Now, after Pinheiro was able to earn 2 takedowns initially on Kyle Parco, Parco fired back at the end of the second period with an inside trip to get the score 5-4. And then with Pinheiro's escape in the third period, ended up tying up, going to sudden victory. Pinheiro ends up shooting. Parco reattacked for a takedown that ended up resulting in his victory. This was a great match with Parco winning that takedown over Pinheiro Johnson, and it showed that, Pinheiro was honestly a little bit disappointed at the end of this. And so, yes, Iowa State ended up winning this duel meet 19-15, but I jumped my takeaway for a quick second, but my takeaway here is that, yeah, Pinheiro still got some work to do. I think he was a little bit disappointed. I think he thinks he's on top of the world. And I don't think he's like a cocky guy or anything like that. But, I think this match probably humbled him a little bit, but will get him working even harder going into the postseason, which makes him even scarier. And I'm looking forward to that. And Iowa State, yeah, they're a top team. And they're not, as I've said in past videos, they're not like coming for a national title, I don't think, or anything. I don't think they're going to be able to beat a Penn State or an Iowa. But they got guys that can get on the podium. Now, before I talk about Spencer Lee and Iowa and the Hawkeyes and how there were some very, very close margins of victory, let's get to some quick lightning headlines, which is that Penn had a good match against North Carolina, ended up beating them 19-17. Northwestern ended up beating Minnesota 18-11 over the weekend. Not a ton of crazy upsets here or any insane matches, just some good hard knock wrestlers. Frankie Toshihar beat Jacob Berglund. Yaya Thomas beat Michael Blockus, a good win. Trevor Chumbley, that's probably the biggest, upset, beating Brayton Lee, who is considered a top guy at 57. And between Northwestern and Minnesota, and as far as my thoughts there, these are two evenly matched teams. I'm not shocked that happened, but it's a good kickoff to the Big Ten season. And speaking of the Big Ten season kicking off, Penn State, of course, opened their season 28-11 over the Wisconsin Badgers. Now, I expected this dual meet. I didn't think it was going to be that close, but it had a lot of hype behind it, mostly because of Austin Gomez kind of talking it up on Twitter, saying this duel is going to be awesome. And it was a good match, right? We had RBY Wrestling getting a major over Taylor Lamont, Bo Bartlett with a major decision, Austin Gomez beating Shane Van Ness, who put up a battle. But really the biggest match here, other than Penn State winning 28-11, part of what went into that was Levi Haynes getting a nice victory over Garrett Model. Honestly, his first major victory of his collegiate career. And this was over a top 15 ranked model of Wisconsin. And he scored bonus points on him, which I think was even more impressive and telling. The crazy thing here is just that fact that like Haynes was in high school last year. Yeah, he didn't like wrestle the high school season. He wrestled a lot of college matches, but still, this is a high school age kid that came in and now is wrestling as a true freshman, is beating top 15 ranked guys in the country. And I wonder how big of a threat he's going to be at this 157 pounds weight class. You let me know. And that moves us on to the third wrestling headline, which is that Iowa and Spencer Lee almost lost. And like, I'm not exaggerating that. I'm not saying that for clickbait. Like, they literally almost lost. It was wild. So what exactly happened here? Well, the first match happened here with Illinois and Iowa over the weekend. And this match dual meet started not that great. Yeah, Spencer Lee started out with the pin. That's what we expect. But Shriver ended up getting pinned by Lucas Bird at 33. Bird was super psyched about this. Then Drew Bennett ended up going in for Iowa. And no, there's no real Woods in that match, which, yes, that of course had to play into things. And I'm hoping that all of his injuries and whatever he's dealing with is going to get better by the time that, we get to the Penn State-Iowa match. And we're just a couple weekends away, right? Max Murin ended up getting things back. But what really shook things off here was Mikey Carr coming back. And he hasn't really wrestled a full season in a few years. I'm happy that he's back. I'm psyched. But he ended up coming back and getting a good victory for the Iowa Hawkeyes here, which led to Edmund Ruth beating Nelson Brands, a good victory. Not an upset, but a good victory. And Zach Bronigal, this was definitely the biggest upset at this duel, and the third major upset outside of those two I mentioned in the first wrestling headline. In Bronigal, now at 197, with the other craziness that's happening with Michael Beard and Max Dean, you see that nice takedown he hit on Jacob Warner, 3-1 late in the third period, sending this Iowa versus Illinois match it was 19-19 going into the final match with Tony Cassiope and Matt Robleski. Well, what ended up happening here? Unfortunately, for the fans and for Illinois, Robleski ended up getting stalled out of the match by Cassiope. Cassiope just pushed the pace, got stalled out, and that was it. Iowa ended up winning this in a kind of anticlimactic fashion, 25-19. But Illinois, man, they pushed the pace. And you speak about pushing the pace, Spencer Lee, okay? But I first have to give props again to Illinois because they pushed Iowa, and now they beat Wisconsin 18-17 over the weekend as well. It was a insane weekend. And Flow Wrestling reports that Spencer Lee just wrestled the craziest period of his life. Maybe. I don't know. You let me know if you think this was the craziest period of his life. It was definitely nuts. Like, it wasn't a crazy dual meet like Illinois. Like, Iowa put a beatdown on Purdue, but, Spencer Lee versus Matt Ramos. Matt Ramos came to wrestle of Purdue at 125. He's 19-3 this season. Just a sophomore, a young guy for the Purdue Boilermakers. And, you see this. Tweets were going out wild. Wrestling Changed My Life tweet out, goodness, Matt Ramos is up 8-2 on Spencer Lee. A minute 21 left in the first. Yes, Matt Ramos was up 8-2 on Spencer Lee, the three-time national champion. The reigning national champion at 125 was down 8-2. So how did this happen? Well, Matt Ramos ended up hitting a takedown on Spencer Lee early on. He tossed him, took him to his back, and you see right here, he tossed him to his back, ended up getting back points. And yeah, he was close to being pinned. Was he pinned? No, he wasn't pinned, but he was sure darn fighting for his life. Okay, and the only thing that Spencer Lee had left to do was fight back, and of course, Spencer Lee did fight back. He took no time, taking Matt Ramos down, tilting him up, throwing him right over to his back, and pinning him all in the first period. This all happened, which to me is just the most insane part. And, I don't know the last time Spencer Lee had that crazy of a match, honestly. I don't know the last time Spencer Lee was taken down like that. It's been some time. The interesting thing was he wasn't taken down from, based on his knees. And, my take here is that Spencer Lee, as I've said before, is going to struggle a bit this season because of those knees. Spencer Lee is better than the rest of the field, but he's going to struggle with those knees. He may even take a loss in this Big Ten season. Do I think he's going to lose out on the national title? No. But the thing that I most like to see is Spencer fired up, coming off the mat, super psyched, hyped up to win. And you don't see him like that too often unless you're in a Penn State and Iowa match. Or like even winning the national title, he's not even that psyched up to win. Like he's happy, but he was psyched. And so were the fans. And I want you to comment right now. Do you think that Spencer Lee is going to take a loss this season? If you haven't already, I recommend that you check out my video on the top Iowa Hawkeyes of all time.